Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the OT Unleashed podcast. I am your host, Erik Johnson, and we are continuing our student takeover series with the Rehab Arcade and Katie Peterson. Katie has taken us through several weeks of different stuff related to gaming, adaptive gaming, therapeutic gaming, evaluations, documentation, all these things. And we wanted to spend some time talking a little bit more about kind of the why and the evidence behind video games in general. And so we wanted to take this particular episode and just kind of run down some of the things. Katie, you have obviously done a lot of research in this space. Whenever we have students do their capstone with us, we always do big lit reviews and we have conversations and try to add to the literature. So I wanted to sit down with you, kind of talk with you about what you found, what kind of resonated with you, and then just kind of take it from there. So, when we talk about video games, a lot of people kind of come in and think like, well, it's cute. It's, a niche thing, maybe not a lot of evidence behind it. And so, so this conversation a lot has to kind of go into the, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be cute and not evidence-based, right? So, like, first of all, why would you say, like, in your kind of opinion, would it be important for OTs to look at evidence when, I mean, they're doing gaming, but really looking at anything,
Right. Yeah, I'm very excited about this topic, and kind of giving our listeners a little insight on like just supporting all of the things and concepts that we've already talked about. And,
Yeah,
throughout my time as a student, this topic, gaming in occupational therapy, has been primarily my focus. So, like Erik said, I have done a lot of research on, the benefits, if a certain population is more beneficial to using this as an intervention, the accessibility concepts, and what the overall outcomes are. But when preparing for this episode, I really just wanted to focus on kind of those concepts that we've already talked about and supporting those with the evidence.
yeah,
But going back to why it's important for occupational therapists and our profession in general to kind of be looking at the evidence is because essentially gaming can sometimes be misunderstood as just that leisure or entertainment thing that
yeah,
a lot of people like to associate gaming with. But when we really look at the research, we can see that gaming, especially when it's used intentionally, supports so many types of motor recovery, cognition,
yeah,
engagement, and participation. And it
yeah,
just helps justify that gaming is a skill evidence-based intervention rather
yeah,
than something that is just fun or supplemental. It
yeah,
really goes back to any intervention that we're using as therapists. You have to have something that supports the reason that you're going to be implementing this
yeah, yeah,
practice.
that's a good point.
It's not just, oh, I see this is a cool concept. Someone else is using it over there. I want to use it for my patient. Well, why are you going to be using it for your patient? Are you
Yeah,
supporting it for stroke and motor recovery or upper limb recovery? Like,
yeah,
why? And there's so much evidence that supports why we should be using it. So it is important that if you're going to be using any intervention in practice, you need to know why, and you need to know why the evidence supports that this is going to be beneficial for your client.
yeah. Well, like, I mean, obviously I agree with all that because I do this, right? But, one of the things that always comes up when you talk about either video games or really kind of, I mean, there's been a big turn where we are trying to be, tap into the enjoyment of therapy. Purposeful activity is something that means something to people, right? Like you use occupations as means and ends,
Right.
So constantly what comes up all the time is the term gamification. So maybe you can describe to our listeners, like, what is gamification, how does it fit into the mix here, and how can they use that?
Right. So one of the articles that I wanted to include in this was the use of gamification for adult physical rehabilitation and occupational therapy.
Yeah.
So essentially, gamification is defined as adding games or game-like elements in non-game activities in order to encourage participation and engagement. So we're thinking about traditional interventions, but using some gaming techniques and stuff to help encourage those patients and to motivate those patients to be able to perform and
Yeah.
increase those functional outcomes in therapy. So we're really just looking at how we can continue to engage our clients and support them in that therapeutic process.
Yeah.
So I looked at this one article by Zolnick and his colleagues, which really dives into the concept within occupational therapy. And it talks a lot about how gamification isn't necessarily a new concept in OT, but the fact that, because it really does align with all of our key like factors in occupational
Yeah.
therapy, like it's
Yeah.
looking at like that intrinsic motivation, the extrinsic motivation, and just those underlying principles that we, stand by in occupational
Yeah.
therapy. So it was looking a lot at how we can use it in adult rehab rather than just pediatrics, because that's where we're usually seeing gamification. Because with kids, you have to engage them in a little bit of a different way a lot of times, because a lot of times kids aren't want to go do what you're asking them to do in therapy because they don't understand that this is going to improve whatever goal that you're working on with them.
Yeah.
So basically, in this article, we're looking at how in occupational therapy, we have long incorporated these elements through meaningful, motivating activities that
Yeah.
naturally promote participation. But by integrating features in gaming, such as that feedback, rewards, and that natural grading that we see
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
games, it aligns with our focus and allows us to have that just right challenge to facilitate that skill development. And
Yeah.
this article was really cool too because it showed a bunch of different examples of this. It showed how it can reach various populations, stroke patients, Parkinson's patients, upper limb rehabilitation, which I really liked that it drew all of those components and showed that it wasn't specific to one population. And it
Yeah.
also showed that it, throughout the lifespan, not just children, but with adults, it has been seen as being beneficial in our
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah. So it's not really entirely like a whole new like OT practice necessarily. It's not
No.
like we're, inventing something brand new. It's just a lot of incorporation and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows us too, like, it's not a new concept, but as technology is continuing to emerge, including like virtual reality and digital gaming platforms, it expands the ability for therapists to target all of those skills and all of the focus simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say, you mentioned kind of motivation and stuff like that, but what does research say about motivation, like, when you're using gaming therapeutically? Like, did it touch on that? What is that
Yeah.
about?
So motivation is going to be like the key to any therapeutic intervention, honestly. And
Yeah,
it's one of the strongest findings with using video games in therapy,
yeah,
because it incorporates those feedbacks, rewards, and progression, which can increase engagement. For
yeah,
example, like, if you're playing a video game and maybe you don't reach the level or you're not completing it the way that you intended the first time, but then
yeah,
here, we're going to adjust this, we're going to maybe grade it a little bit, and now I'm keep on going. I'm beating this level, I'm beating the next level. Like that's going
yeah,
to be motivating for the patient.
yeah,
And it's going to encourage participation. It's going to guide improvement. It's going to provide that immediate feedback that some
yeah,
patients really need to see, and just really create that just right challenge,
yeah.
which,
And it's interesting. Like for me, like when I was working with like people in Afghanistan, like it almost becomes a competition with themselves,
right.
like you said, when you're grading the activity, it's like, oh man, like if it's too hard for them, we can make it easier. and then start to grade that activity. And then, honestly, sometimes like I'll see clients that are like, oh, I'm just not getting anywhere. And I was like, well, like, look where we started. Like, and you can almost objectify the therapy by saying like, you only got 20 points on, last week, and now you're getting like 150 points or something,
Right.
so,
Yeah, no,
I love that part.
it is a super awesome way to keep the client engaged and show them that the progress is there, because a lot of times I feel like in therapy patients will get discouraged because they don't see that immediate progress.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that gaming is going to provide that every single time, but you can use it as a way to be like, hey, look where you're at. Like it's a tangible thing that we're
Yeah.
looking at, which I
Yeah.
think is an amazing way to use it, to keep that motivation going and encouraging them to continue working to be the way that they want to be and to be as independent and functional as possible.
Yeah. Well, I want to break this down a little bit more. Like, let's talk about the physical rehab. Now, we have divided our kind of sections of kind of therapeutic intervention into like therapeutic gaming into like physical rehab, mental health, cognition, therapeutic exercise, right? So before we get into anything else, let's talk about the physical rehab part. And you did mention it a bit, but what does the evidence say about motor recovery and using gaming?
Right. So one of like the big things I wanted to look at today was giving a good example about how new emerging technology is continuing to enhance our occupational therapy interventions. And there is a lot of strong support of using gaming in physical rehab, especially in these emerging technologies. So, an article that I found and I wanted to kind of highlight in this one is on the Rehago, which is a home-based training app using virtual reality to improve functional performance of stroke patients using mirror therapy and that gamification concept. So this
Yeah.
kind of just looks at one example of how we can use it for physical rehab. And I know, like in our past episodes, we talked about therapeutic gaming and all the benefits of that and how we can tailor these interventions to meet our clients. But I just wanted to look at a new study that they were looking at using virtual reality because I feel like that's one of the newest, you know, concepts
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
gaming.
Yeah.
So basically, this study looked at VR-based rehabilitation systems for stroke patients using that gamified exercises. So
Okay.
it investigates the effectiveness of virtual reality using a like mirror therapy. So we know that mirror therapy is beneficial for stroke patients.
Yeah.
So in this study, it was looking at how we can use virtual reality concepts in combined with mirror therapy to create like a safe at-home environment for the stroke patients and seeing if that would improve their functional outcomes. So using the Rehago system, participants engaged in a structured therapy session, and it was 30 minutes per day for 5 days a week over a 6-week period.
Okay.
And it incorporated interactive game-like tasks designed to promote motor recovery through repetition, engagement, and real-time feedback. And over after they completed these tasks over the 6-week period, they were assessed by using the FIM, so the Functional Independence Measure score, and improvements of 7.13 points
Oh
were
my
shown
gosh.
in the quality of life scores.
Wow, that's
So
crazy.
it showed that using virtual reality as a means to improve, the FIM, we use this as an outcome measure all the time for stroke
Yeah.
patients. But we wanted to see how it would be, if there would be any type of increase in their
Yeah.
independence score after using virtual reality
So, so,
as the intervention.
so you mentioned so how did this work? Like, did they like show them how to use it in the clinic, and then say, now I want you to go home and this is your like homework. This is your home exercise program for the next couple weeks. Or is that what it kind of looked like?
Yeah, so basically they did training for them.
Yeah.
They did a brief introduction of the study, and they did a series of training for the therapists, and then they did individual training based on their ability and functional level. And then they were fully informed with the training, and they took their baseline measurements with the FIM. And then they were able to see how they used it at home.
Yeah.
And I can insert some of the pictures and screenshots of some of the training exercises and examples that they
Yeah.
used,
Yeah.
and hand movements with mirror therapy, and modes that
Yeah.
were, it's super, super cool. And
Yeah.
basically, they were able to use these gaming technology and let them use it at home. And then they were able to see how their FIM
The film
score.
sports race. So
Yeah.
I wonder, like, it'd be cool to do a repeat study and do like a comparison to traditional therapies for stroke recovery, and then see if that's different. I love these numbers. Obviously, they're beautiful, but numbers on their own sometimes it's like, oh, that's gorgeous. What would it look like if we did a traditional recovery or traditional stroke recovery? Did they mention that at all? Any kind of comparison?
So it did talk about how using this could be an adjunct to traditional therapy.
Sure.
That was one of their, in their discussion, talking about there's still more
Yeah.
research needed to be done and more training and, understanding the software and the outcomes to, not just get rid of traditional mirror
Yeah.
therapy
Just
for
to
stroke
supplement
patients.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it
So,
is showing that, it can be used in supplement adjunct to it. But
yeah. Well, what would you say, like, so that's obviously a really cool study, but what would you say, like, that the gaming part, let's say, is particularly effective in rehabilitation? Like, what do you think about that would be kind of that factor?
well, I mean, it's just awesome to see that engaging in gaming is can lead to functional improvements. It's
Yeah.
not just motivating them to participate, it's also
Yeah.
showing those actual
Yeah.
improvements. With the FIM
Yeah.
scores, you see that there is a big improvement in their quality of life. And it's able to create mass repetition as well. So,
Yeah.
in traditional therapy, a lot of times we'll ask a patient to do however many sets and reps of an exercise, or
Yeah.
you need to go over here. And sometimes that feels like exercise. And not every
Yeah.
patient is going to want to just straight up exercise in therapy.
Yeah.
So it's really cool because that repetition is really built into therapy, and
Yeah.
they're motivated to keep repeating these movements over and over to achieve a goal. So,
Yeah.
in this study, there was a couple like asteroid blocking and ball bouncing,
Yeah.
and they were repeatedly doing these movements
Yeah.
to reach whatever level that they were desiring to do. So instead of in traditional therapy, when that motivation or that repetition can feel super tedious,
Yeah.
the clients are more motivated to repeat those movements over
Yeah.
and over, which supports neuroplasticity and that skill development.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, if you think about it, at the end of the day, this is what gamification is. It's like taking to these traditional things that seem tedious, but putting some kind of like joy into it,
Yeah.
like, instead of being like, hey, move this 16 times and, 3 times a day or whatever, it's like, hey, play this game, which is going to
Mhm.
move you 16 times, 3 times a day or whatever. And that's true. That's kind of true to the gamification part of that. So, all
Right.
right. Small example, really good example for physical rehabilitation, but let's move over to cognition. I think a lot of people think like, whenever we think about therapeutic gaming, a lot of times it's like, oh, the Nintendo Wii, and you're moving things and you're squeezing things and, movement. But cognition could also, you know, really benefit from kind of a gamification approach. So tell me about what you found with like the cognition space.
Yeah, it's definitely a big aspect when it comes to gaming too, because you have to look about how gaming can support cognitive and executive functioning skills. So thinking about attention, you have to be
Yeah.
able to attend to the game, to follow the directions, problem solving skills, decision making, sequencing. And research shows that gamified interventions can be used to target both motor and cognitive skills simultaneously, especially in these controlled environments like virtual reality. Because you think
Yeah.
about, with stroke patients, sometimes, there's going to be cognitive deficits. They're not going to
Sure.
be able to attend to the game. They're not going to be able to problem solve, sequence. But if you look beyond how it's, how helping them with their motor skills, like there is a huge cognitive skill that they are focusing on in gamified interventions. And it's
Yeah.
very, very beneficial. I know we've touched on cognition a little bit in the past episodes, but I mean, pretty much every article that you read, it talks a lot about motor skills development. That's like the big physical rehab um,
Yeah.
thing that they're trying to promote. But then if
Yeah.
you break it down from an OT perspective, it's like, okay, yeah, they also have to navigate this course and they have to be able to, okay, this is in my way. How do I get around that? Or
Yeah.
maybe it's even just, getting the game started and sequencing the steps that you need to be able to make the game work. Um,
Yeah.
so cognition is definitely a big factor when it comes to those gamified interventions as well.
So, okay, so I do like the cognition component and everything, but like, when you're working with cognition and trying to increase that executive function and all that stuff, like, it's great and we can probably objectify or like evaluate and objectively see improvement, but how does the cognition, the therapeutic approach, the gamified therapeutic approach for cognition translate to like real life? What does that look like going from that to that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of great research on how it does translate. So,
Yeah.
in therapy, we sometimes like to simulate things. We don't have the space necessarily to simulate, cooking or, whatever task we're working
Yeah.
on with our patient. But in using like virtual reality, for example, is super exciting because you can simulate those real life activities in a safe and structured environment. And they can help individuals transfer their learned behaviors and responses to real life. So,
Yeah.
one of the last articles that I explored was regarding the meaning and purpose behind digital and adaptive gaming. And it
Yeah.
was a scoping review by Kevin Berner and his team, which did the game
The game
tool.
tool. Yeah.
Yeah, the game tool that we looked at in our evaluation episode. So I was really excited to read some of his research, which kind of concluded that we needed a little bit of a evaluation tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in his research, it was looking at um, how how research studies that describe the meaning and purpose behind participating in digital gaming with people with disabilities. So it was looking about how we can use active video gamings in rehabilitation and community settings and the study of gaming and different experiences to really immerse the individual in that experience and how it can translate that motivation that we were talking about into the real world, um, and looking at the findings of areas of future research to better understand the meaning and purpose of gaming with people with disabilities.
Yeah.
So it was really awesome because it was looking more about gaming as an occupation and giving practitioners a better understanding of how beneficial it is and how it can
Yeah.
translate to that real world experience, which is all we've been talking about throughout this podcast series, which I felt like was just a valuable piece of evidence to support everything that we've been talking about and understanding the perceptions of disabled people regarding the importance and valuable digital gaming and adaptive gaming.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like it is, sometimes we lose sight of all those things. Like a lot of people, again, kind of going back to thinking like, oh, you're playing video games. It's like, well, we're not playing video games. So we are, but we're gamifying the therapeutic experience to see better outcomes on the back end. And I think that that is one thing that people miss all the time. Like, well,
Yeah.
you can't play video games because it's not therapy. Well, not necessarily the case,
Yeah.
and also it's interesting because we also talk about kiddos, like we've talked about stroke and Parkinson's, older adults, and you mentioned pediatrics, but I mean the number one occupation for kids is what?
Is play. Yeah.
It's play, right? And we know that if we can engage them in play as they're going through a recovery process. I mean, think about like when I was working in the burn center in San Antonio. Um, I worked with mostly adults, but we talked a lot with the other burn centers who were pediatric focused burn centers. And,
Mhm.
if you know anything about burn recovery, it's massive amount of pain, and I've said this all the time that distraction is powerful medicine, and if I can
Yeah.
immerse somebody into like a video game, be able to like, have them dive into that space while we're doing even a therapeutic intervention where maybe even just using gaming as the distraction, then all of a sudden we can potentially see better outcomes,
Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head earlier with, it's not supposed to necessarily replace everything. It's just a supplemental tool that you can use, and maybe find better outcomes with. I think
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, finding better outcomes is what we're looking for. I mean, it's going to
Definitely.
increase like the joy of therapy. It's going to increase, I mean, even in your facilities, like you'll see more money if you have better
Yeah.
outcomes. It just happens. So anyway, so I love all that. So, all right, so we have one. I know one other piece that I wanted to get to was kind of psychosocial outcomes, maybe that mental health space.
Mhm.
And this one's a little bit more tricky because it's like, like how does this work? Like, how do and I think a lot of people associate negative mental health things with video games. But what does the research tell us about positive psychosocial outcomes using gaming?
Yeah. So I think going back to the meaning and purpose of digital and adaptive gaming and that scoping review, he really broke it down to the 8 key reasons why individuals engage in gaming, including connecting socially, relaxing and unwinding, improving
Yeah,
those skills, appreciating the storytelling and the creativity, having fun, being part of a community, engaging in something inclusive, and
yeah,
participating in equal playing fields.
yeah,
So, gaming has a huge impact on social participation and emotional well being. And research has found that gaming can create an enjoyable and a meaningful way to socialize with peers, which is
mm,
especially important for those who maybe experience that isolation. And, you know, it can go way beyond just the physical, the cognitive skills. Like
yeah,
that emotional well-being is huge. And being able to provide a patient with the ability to participate in something that is meaningful for them, or giving them a way to socialize with others or participate in something socially with anybody that they don't even know that they
yeah,
have a disability, maybe, or that
yeah.
something's going on. It just provides them with that emotional well-being and that support that can, improve the mental health aspect of it too.
Yeah. Anytime that we talk about mental health and gaming and whatnot, like I always go back to one of my favorite things about gaming in general, and that is the psychosocial impact, especially when you're doing like couch co-op gaming, right? So you just talked about how it's really good for people to play together. That's where our biggest therapeutic benefit is. Outside of traditional therapies, if we're playing with somebody, we have a good time. It's why we play sports. We go out and play sports because we enjoy being with other people. We love winning together and we love competing together. Like even in the gaming space, one of my favorite things is being together on a couch playing a game together, whether it's like Ninja Turtles or, maybe like one of my favorite stories from Afghanistan was a physical therapist that was deployed with me. And it was tough, deployment's pretty tough. There's a lot of bad things, and so it was really a great space to escape for a minute. And the physical therapist and I, John Lesher, he and I would play a game called Army of Two, and I would be a character, he'd be a character, and we just tackled nonsensical scenarios together, beating the aliens and fighting through these levels and winning the day. But one of my favorite things was just sitting down with him, and we would talk about the day, we would play the video game, we'd talk about what tomorrow looks like. So much happens in those spaces where you're together. That's so powerful. And it's almost like sometimes you can't even calculate the benefit. You can't
Yeah.
objectify the benefit, and so I really love that. So that said, like, what would you say? Is there any like limitations? Like, did the research say anything about like limitations or things to watch out for?
Yeah.
With gaming.
So, pretty much every article that you read about adaptive gaming is going to say there's more research that needs to be done, especially
Yeah,
with an ever-changing, technologically advanced society.
sure.
But one of like the big things that we find for our clients is that sometimes commercial gaming can be a little bit more difficult because it's not specifically designed for individuals with disability.
Yeah,
But honestly, we've talked about all the ways that you can adapt games and you can, add an adaptive controller. You can
yeah,
change the speed of stuff, these
yeah,
built-in solutions that can help mitigate these issues. So it's exciting that we are becoming a more accessible society within commercial gaming. But for practitioners and therapists, this is where I find and I see the biggest, limitation is that the lack of knowledge, training, some of the high costs with some of these gaming solutions, just don't they just create a barrier for the widespread adoption of using gaming in therapeutic settings.
yeah,
And that is what really drew me into this topic in the beginning is like I've read all these articles. We see how, virtual reality can be a great tool to have to use as an
hmm,
intervention, and how gaming interventions have been proven to be just as effective or more effective than some of those traditional interventions.
yeah,
So that's why I wanted to make this podcast series in the first place to, hope to spread some awareness and hopefully limit and advocate and educate practitioners on how using gaming interventions in their sessions can be less intimidating. And
yeah,
I just really think that gaming is such a valuable tool. And again, it increases motivation, and it encourages our patients who are participating. And I really wanted to create this series that was interactive and maybe you could listen just on the way to work. It's not anything you have to stress about, just to give um, therapists an idea of how we can start implementing technology into therapy even
yeah,
more. But
yeah,
there's just a lot of things that limits the use of it in therapy, and it's been around for a while, but it's still not widespread. So
yeah. Well, and I think like, with some of the limitation things, like you said, and I'll piggyback on that, sometimes you know, the research, we can see it, but it hasn't been done. The benefits we can see, but it hasn't been done, and, like, even like you were saying with, some of the therapeutic places where we're trying to engage people with disabilities to be able to play. I think the gaming industry in general, they're being a lot more intentional with creating, pulling down some of these barriers. And a great example is the Xbox created what they called Copilot at the time, and now it's Game Assist. But essentially, where you can take two controllers and use them at the same time for the one character. So like you said, instead of playing maybe a game that has two separate players, you can give your kid maybe who has some motor deficits or whatever, but can push one button, part of the game where you're controlling the rest of the game. Like, hey, when it's time to jump, you need to jump, and then I will move the rest of it, and then together you're playing, and PlayStation has the option for this now as well, where you can combine two different therapies and whatnot, or two different controllers together. So I do think there are a lot of great options, that, and some of those barriers are being pulled down. But anyway, overall, I love it. And honestly, like, I love that we are kind of discussing some of these. And Katie, as we're coming, toward the end of the episode, I did want to, point out that, Katie mentioned 3 different articles in this particular podcast today. And I think it's really a great witness to that there is research being done. There is articles being written. There is a lot of work being done in this space outside of OT, and even in the industry itself. And I think it's important to discover those things. If you do look at the Rehab Arcade, there's an entire section dedicated to evidence, and you guys can explore that thoroughly, as you kind of start breaking it down. What are you trying to get evidence for? Is it cognition? Is it physical disabilities, etc.? And we have several articles that will provide the evidence on why it works and how it works. And I love that. And we're also kind of coming up with a more informal space that is, YouTube channels and different places on the internet where you can access information that has been kind of gathered outside of the formal research. So we're hoping to create that for you as well. So Katie, final thoughts, biggest takeaways from today. What would you say?
I think the biggest takeaway is just that gaming is more than just play. If you use it intentionally, it's a very powerful tool for participation, independence, and quality of life. And these articles and the evidence behind it supports why we should implement it into therapy, how you can use it, and the benefits that you can provide to each and every single client that uses it. So I'm so glad that we got to kind of give some insight on the evidence that supports all these concepts that we have been chatting about over the past couple weeks and throughout this series, and hopefully give some people, practitioners, therapists, whoever's listening, some insight on why it's working, how it's working, and those technologies that will continue to support and grow to make adaptive gaming and gaming in general a very valuable part of therapy.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you guys, thanks so much for being on the podcast with us today. And Katie, thank you for all the research you've done, putting this together, and having this conversation. We only have a couple more episodes left. And so next week, we're going to have one of our other doctorate students going to be joining us on the podcast, Laura Weiss, who spent her time in her capstone building a therapeutic game generator for tabletop role-playing games. And she's going to discuss that process and what went into it, and just another different avenue of being able to use gaming therapeutically. And we're really excited about that. So Katie, thanks again for being on. And everybody, once again, please check out the evidence page for the Rehab Arcade, and, shoot us a comment in the notes below and whatnot, and we'd love to engage with you. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.